Hi, my name is Andrew Tschesnok. I'm the CEO and founder and original technologist of Organic Motion. Welcome to Blur. Today I'd like to talk about HCI and why it's becoming extremely important in the next 5 to 10 years. Of course, when we look at the future, we really have to look a little bit at the past and figure out how certain trends are moving forward. And we quickly find that things are very crazy since we're on these accelerated exponential growth paths. So I think taking a quick look at some of these curves might give us a foundation to work off. Specifically, I want to focus in on the perfect exponential growth curve. This is the one that's used by singularity folks to predict certain things about the future, such as that by 2045 man becomes immortal. And they have these wonderful graphs that shows how Moore's law accelerates to the point where a single computer becomes smarter than all human brains put together around 2045. Of course, at that point, either the computers kill us all or they solve all our problems and we become immortal and live in endless bliss. In reality, however, I think we see always, over and over and over, without exception, two other types of curves, such as an exponent against a depleting resource, as we might see here in U.S. oil production. Once we hit half the supply, there is a decay, and there's no way around it. It is symmetrical. The same way, even more common, an exponent against the limit. You know, the idea that, you know, if you sell products into population, and everybody's got a product, well, then you're going to have a hard time selling them a second product. So a beautiful example here is adaptation rates of consumers for consumer electronics. And we're seeing an ever-accelerating adoption rate when it comes to internet and cell phones and so on. The microwave is actually a big one. But we're always seeing this perfect S-curve. So what does this have to do with HCI? Well, let's dive right in to Moore's law. Beautiful straight line here, graphed on exponential graph paper, so it represents a perfect upward curve, accelerating curve. So you can't really tell that there's a problem here unless we start looking into the details. And with details, I'm talking about clock speed, for instance. Not a direct link to Moore's law, but yet very, very important. In around 2003, we ran into a problem. We could not make processors faster as far as the clock rate. So, you know, to get around that, you know, companies started building multiple processors, and then they would run in parallel. And so technically, they could have specs that say, well, it's still twice as fast and 4 times as fast, and we're doing more cycles per clock cycle, and so on. But ultimately, we've lost something here. We don't have a processor that runs at 24 gigahertz. I would love to have a processor at 24 gigahertz. Instead, we have to develop software that runs in parallel, and there's clearly some diminishing returns there because there's communications between processors. So we're seeing problems in paradise here. Specifically, if we really look at the big picture, Moore's law has to end. Without getting specifics about timelines and speeds, you know, we've hit some limits in clock speed, and yes, they will push that back, and maybe there's a light computer and so on that pushes that back further. And multi-cores, of course, extend that until you hit some kind of communications level issue between cores. But ultimately, there's going to be some fundamental, like E equals mc squared, and some relativity issues, speed of light, those kind of things that are going to slow us down. And ultimately, also, you know, as we go parallel, there are going to be limits to our resources on Earth of how many processors we can build. So there will be an end to Moore's law, and we will see this beautiful curve right here. So what does this have to do with HCI? Well, we've seen something similar, if I could make the human connection right now. Let's take a look at brain development. If I go back 10 million years and from there till current times, we see a very similar graph. We see this first linear but then accelerating graph about the human brain size. And if I was an alien and I looked at that graph, I'd say, oh my God, you know, we look at this, another 100,000 years and they're going to turn into God and they're going to become our masters, and this is very threatening and we have to do something about this. But here on Earth, we know differently, right? Because if we really look at this same graph and focus on the last part, we're seeing something that maybe we've seen with processor speed. which is there's this acceleration all the way through to about 100,000 years ago, and then we plateau, we become flat. Somehow, our brains aren't getting bigger, they're not necessarily getting smarter. There's a lot of people that would theorize that, hey, we're no smarter than early man. And when you look at singularity theorists, they'll tell you that the brain has 10 to the 16 neurons in it, and that gives you an idea of processing power. And then there's been some later discoveries that each neuron is like a supercomputer, and maybe it's 10 to the 28. And then there's further talk that maybe there's some quantum physics rules at play in the brain, and that maybe the whole thing is just a little more complex than we really thought. And so, did we hit some kind of biological limit? Can the brain not get smarter? I mean, evolution has hit a limit there? Or have we hit some kind of physical limit in the world that we live in? Not here to answer those questions, but I think they can't really be ignored. At the same time, something else has happened, right? We're not living in caves. So what happened? Why are we landing on the moon? Why are we building computers? Why do we see the kind of progress in society? Well, we've found another way. Much like the multi-core way, we've built social systems. So on top of a brain that is no longer getting faster, we're having systems where brains are interconnecting with each other, such as language, such as, hey, think of the internet. I mean, we're all talking to each other, and so there's books. We're sharing information. So as a whole, we're becoming smarter than one individual brain because we have multiple brains working together. So what does this really mean? Let's look at this from a point of view of evolution, but also from a point of view of HCI, or at least from human interfaces, not necessarily computers yet. If we zoom in and we look at this guy, this is 100,000 years ago. He's got everything he needs. He's got weapons, he's got tools, he's got friends, he's developed natural language, it comes natural to the brain, he's got family life. He has evolved to the point over the last 10 million years that everything he comes across in his life comes very, very natural. Even if he didn't have any training, he would develop the tools and the knowledge that he has fundamentally without a social system. So I've given him this little graph. This is my pseudoscience graph of showing interface level. So at the caveman level, interfaces are perfect because they perfectly match the way evolution has made his brain. So, but of course one of them couldn't leave good enough alone and had to start painting on walls. And this is kind of where it all starts. We have the creative types painting on walls, and it's very unique because now a message can be left behind. So you don't just speak within your local group and convey ideas, but now you can leave ideas throughout time and for others throughout space as you move on. Now, this is simple at first, but it quickly moves on to symbols. And, the idea that you represent items in symbols. Now, symbols are the first step because someone without training could still look at those symbols and say, okay, it's an eye and there's a guy, and I think I've figured out what it is. So there's coding and decoding, but there's not a lot of pre-knowledge needed. Of course, you can see where this is going. As soon as you get to phonetic alphabets, the idea that you can record the sound of words in a written way. So you don't need a symbol for every object, which would become very difficult, but you can simply record language. Now, very, very powerful, because now the spoken word, the exact description of something, can be written down and shared over time and space. But you need years of training. Suddenly you have to go to school, and this is no longer easy. It does not come natural to the brain. The brain is smart, can handle these kind of things, but not in any kind of easy way. And as you can see this graph that I've been following, I start giving this a -3 in the user interface space, because we're doing something. We're slowing down the level of communications in exchange for the breadth, for the depth of communications that we're getting. So speaking is one speed, but writing it down is another. But I can copy this and send this to many different places, and that is the trade-off. And it is a very, very grand trade-off, because this can be read by many, written by one, but read by many. Now they say the sword is, the pen is more powerful than the sword, and absolutely true, but not easy. Very, very difficult interface compared to the sword. The sword, a stone man, a caveman could handle a sword, but not a pen. Years of training, and it just gets worse. This guy really takes it over the top and invents the printing press, Gutenberg. So think of this. Not only does your brain have to sit there and figure out what the letters require, what the letters are that you require to make the sounds of spoken language, but you now have to pull these letters out of this metal bin, and you have to sort them, these reverse letters, and sort them and place them in reverse as a mirror image into this printing press. Very, very complicated, but the benefits are extremely huge. They're printing 3,600 pages per day. And there's sort of relay stations that someone receives a print and now can print another 3,600 a day. And so literature is spreading throughout Europe in a crazy way. Very few, although it's still few, that have printing presses can now reach many, many people, anybody that can read. So it's a fantastic change in human society where ideas become more permanent and much more widely spread. But the interface, the trade-off, the speed at which you can produce these pages has drastically deteriorated. And that is kind of the theory here, that you're kind of going downhill in the speed at which you can interface, what the benefit of reaching many people, the connectivity of society is vastly increasing. And if you look at sort of the technologies that have been developed throughout this time, they reflect that. First computer comes along, 1941, electromechanical. The Z3, it's a 22-bit, 10 hertz system, full Turing machine. Think of the abstraction. Not so much a communications tool at first, but you need to go and on ticker tape have the points in there for the different bits. You have to know the architecture of the machine. You have to program within that architecture. You get a result that is encrypted, that needs to be decrypted, and so on. Clearly a negative 10 out of 10. Computers are just horrible from an interface perspective because of the extreme lack of, the extreme abstraction level. And there's this little picture I always think of. It's a little bit funny because it's true. We really have gone in the opposite direction from caveman times. And the PC is no different. I mean, I just think of it, put a PC in front of someone without training. The level of abstraction is so huge. There's this keyboard, and yes, it's easier than the printing press, but yet the computer is much more difficult than the printing press. There's operating systems, floppy disks. There's some conceptual stuff you have to understand that really goes beyond the printing press. I think you can take anybody with that training and put them into a printing press office, and they can produce something with that after some time. Not so with the computer. The advantage, of course, now is, though, that there's a lot more computers than there were printing presses back then, and we're seeing a further growth of society communicating. The idea that you can now have many people publish and share books to many people. So it's almost a many-to-many now through this type of interface. Now, something very interesting happens where Apple comes along in 1984 and decides, these are very, very difficult to operate. Let's become more human about it. And bring this guy along. And when you look at the screen, you see some very interesting things. Let's say you're using the paint program. I'm seeing symbols again that represent something. I can click on them. I can naturally reach in and click and draw with them. It sounds a little bit like those early days when, with the stone, with the wall paintings and the abstract symbols. Very, very interesting. It is improving things. However, when we look at the success, and I give it a 9 or negative 9 out of 10, only 50,000 units sold. Now that's great for a company, and I'd love to have that kind of company. But 2.5 million market share by 1997, what happened? You'd expect people to go crazy for this kind of thing, and only a certain part of the population did. So let's look at this whole picture. We've got things getting more and more complicated. And at the point where things start getting a little easier, we're not really seeing the craziness in the market to say, hey, this was all wrong before, and the market is ready for very simple user interfaces. So things go on. Now we've got the internet. The internet's been around for a while, and it really took a windowing 2D approach to making it useful. For instance, the Netscape browser goes along and says, well, if things are linked together, let's show that graphically. Let's make use of this mouse where someone can just reach in. But given the vast number of information out there, it's really critical that the human brain can get a grasp of it, and it can only do so if it can think spatially. The idea that this links to that or this is inside of that lets people find things, and that was the critical step. And then, of course, that explodes because we have something new. We have everybody connected to everybody, at least in a subset of society. And now you've got search, and information just is so readily available, and not only can you get information, but you can publish information. And you have systems that are starting to use the human collective, or the idea of a human collective, to get smarter about providing information. So think of it as crowdsourcing, the idea that Google looks at who's linking to what to see what's more important. In a way, it's a crowd grading system. And Wikipedia is the ultimate, of course, where it's crowd-gathered information for crowds. And of course, there's great things about Twitter and Facebook, and we'll get into that in a second. But in 2006, this little guy came along, and something fundamentally started to change. We've got the Wii that was really a piece of crap hardware compared to the status quo at the time. So the hardware was actually worse compared to the Macintosh, which might have been equivalent. So you've got worse hardware, and you're putting a simple interface on it, and grandma can go and play tennis and have fun with it without having to learn about computers. That's amazing, but even more amazing is that was directly reflected in the sales numbers. So there's been a shift in the thinking where, hey, this is great. Let me get one of these and play with them. And of course, it just accelerates from there. The iPhone really was significant because, again, equivalent technology in this case. The only thing that's changed is the interface. The idea that I can, not even with a mouse, but I can reach in and I can touch. And I can get a bigger screen to get feedback on a portable device. Just looking at internet access, internet usage, it just dominates everything else. It also dominates in sales compared to other phones. It is absolutely a breakthrough to come in late into the market. And of course, the iPad, similar to the iPhone, nobody really predicted that the iPad was going to take off. And it is the fastest adopted electronic device of all times. 3 million units in 80 days, which is very, very significant. And the only thing that changed here is the screen got a little bit bigger, so you could see a little bit more. And it's redefining electronic devices. As you can see, I'm slowly making the interface graph a little bit shorter than the negative graph, because things are slowly improving. And then, of course, we go to the big next step with Connect, the idea that 8 million units were sold in 2 months. Now, this is shipped to distributors. Actual sales numbers a little bit less, but certainly record-breaking. Fundamental change in adaptation rates based on really only the interface in this case. And real quick, I want to touch on some of the technologies that are kind of around the corner. Watson won at Jeopardy! The idea that a computer can simply gather all the information that's available online and answer to natural language and give an answer. This is going to be great. In 10 years, this is going to be a chip on your cell phone, and you could ask it anything that the human collective has stored and get the answer. That is amazing, but it's a little bit out in the future. And just wanted to show Avatar Connect, which is the idea that a whole bunch of people can sit in virtual rooms and use natural body language and language, and this is all part of the extension of the Connect. I can see how it's starting to open up that bandwidth as things become more user-friendly. So, we've seen all kinds of amazing changes where we're landing on the moon and all those kind of things, but I think even more exciting is some of the social stuff we're seeing. When you look at the Middle East and Northern Africa, there's something happening, and we're not in a perfect world yet, but imagine a world where everybody can talk to everybody frictionlessly, where there's complete communications. How can a dictator survive? The idea that simply everybody at the same time decides, you know what, I've talked to everybody, we're all going to get up and we're done. Goodbye, dictator. And the dictator can't do anything because everybody's already agreed and there's no secrets. And we can see the beginnings of that with Twitter and Facebook. The idea that there's a logical connection of how we communicate with each other. So there's this graph that I've been hiding a little bit, and as I zoom out, you can see a little bit what this graph is over time, starting at the Stone Age. It's the connectivity effectiveness, which is really equivalent to the human intellect level as a whole, as a human collective. We're getting smarter because we're building interconnects between our individual brains. So if we're not getting smarter as individuals, a big step was this internet. It started off with books, but this interweaving of communications where one person can communicate to all and vice versa. But of course, to get started, we had to start with books, and we had to start with complex systems to become the communications tools. And the thing we lost was the bandwidth. The idea that the caveman could talk to, can do everything naturally, using his smell, his senses, his touch, his language. His brain was perfect, and we've lost that because we had to get all the way down to figuring out what letters go into a printing press to get the message out. And now things are slowly improving, and we're seeing how there's been a sort of an order where at first we all connect on the internet, and there was such value in connecting, first with books, then online. But now everybody's connected, or almost connected. So the next step is, how do we make those connections faster? And that's really what HCI is, and that's really what the next level is. The idea that if I can see and touch and grab, then I can learn so much more, because my brain is so much more capable than just reading language. Think of it as a 300 baud modem. That's the way we connect into the human collective right now when we're thinking about the internet. It's all text-based. But if we can open that up to all our other senses, we might have 1,000 times or 10,000 times more input and output into the human collective. And that's where we're really seeing the biggest leverage in the near future. And then, of course, things like artificial intelligence come in that help us sort through it, kind of a facilitator. So if I really open up this graph, we're kind of seeing, where is it going to go? Well, it's going to the total intellect of all the brains connected. That's our asymptote. And if you have 100% frictionless information exchange with one to all and all to one, then you hit that asymptote, which you probably won't. But what's really exciting is that we're approaching that inflection point. We can say that within 5 or 10 years, we're at the highest, fastest acceleration rate before we hit that inflection point. And that 20 years from now, we're going to get smarter at a slower rate than we are today. So it is a very, very exciting time to be alive. So what is next? Well, clearly, speed used to be better. Now it's really not doing a lot for us. There's this order of information, first information encoding, decoding, that slowed us down. Connectivity really sped things up. Then human bandwidth, we need to fix that, and after that comes AI-assisted communications. So really the new frontier is human bandwidth, the idea that we need to make the connection from our brain to the human collective faster. And that's where we can most affect the acceleration of human society. And what is really the mission of HCI? Well, the mission is things have to be as simple that a caveman can do it with all his senses. So real quick, Organic Motion, the company I work for, we were the first to generate real-time markerless motion capture. So we could have cameras in a room, see exactly what a human was doing, how they were moving, what they looked like. And we're still the only precision real-time markerless motion capture system. And the demo we're showing here on the show floor at Blur shows two systems operating in the same virtual world, and you see one of them stretching out their arms, and you're seeing the first-person point of view on the screen. So that's their arms coming out, and when they look down, they see their feet, and so on. They move naturally. It's this in-body experience. And they were supposed to work together to cook chicken. So one person has to hand coal over, you have to start a fire, put chickens on it. But the coolest thing that happened was that one person by accident dumped the chicken off the grill, and the other person leaned forward, dove, and caught it. Now that's something new, right? That's something that wasn't done over the internet before. The idea that you're in this natural environment and your bandwidth has increased and you communicated in new kinds of ways to solve a problem. I want to show a little bit of technology here. Where there's a lot of talk about Connect right now. We're showing the Connect data versus our data that we get from a multitude of cameras. But the idea is that we could combine the two and get the same kind of data. So the idea of a Connect combined with maybe 2 or 3 video cameras would give you much, much more solid data to get full body immersion, complex moves that go beyond the gestures that we're seeing. So here it just shows full 3D data that we get from using just video cameras in a space. But of course with 14 video cameras, that is not a simple system for the home. And so here is the Connect data. So you see all the data from the front from one viewpoint, but it's undefined in the back. So as we add additional cameras, we're really cutting into that space. Here's an example with 4 cameras, and the camera will pan around to show you. So now we've got really solid 3D data from all angles. And then we just want to show a little bit what this looks like from a movement point of view, and how the data is quite a bit different than you might get from, than you might get from just a Kinect type of device, or potentially from 2 Kinects if they were working together. So a very different algorithm that we're working on. So this is kind of the data that comes out of our system. So it's a much more precise way of computers looking at you, so they can serve you in much more precise ways. Think of it as, online shopping. Now it knows what your size is and how you move and what kind of clothing you should be wearing, and you can just click buy when you go to the virtual GOT or so. That kind of idea. Okay, thank you very much. That's all. Please connect to my Twitter account. I do a lot of reading on Twitter. I'm not doing a lot of writing yet, but this will certainly be the motivation for myself. Companiesorganicmotion.com, and my blog, entrepreneurbyforce.com. Thank you very much.